Hey everybody, if you're just tuning in, it's Rose Griffin from ABA Speech. Tonight we're going to talk about manding, and we're also going to talk about the November freebie. So if you're new here, my name is Rose Griffin. I'm a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst. And I have been doing some Facebook Lives this school year to give you little nuggets of information that hopefully will help you when you're working with students with autism or other complex communication disorders. So in the past couple sessions, we've been talking about manding, which manding is requesting when you're working with an early learner. So when we're working with students who are just trying to find their voice, trying to find a way to communicate with the world, we want to start work with manding. So we talked about what that word means, and we talked about some of the different verbal operants that B.F. Skinner had outlined in his book, Verbal Behavior. And so we had talked about when you're working with students, manding is so important because I have three kids of my own, and so they are always requesting all the time, always requesting. And so that's kind of where communication has to start. And that allows our students to realize that communication is so very powerful. Whether your students using AAC to communicate, sign language, picture exchange, they're understanding I do something, I get something, I do something, I get something, and then they are building a way to communicate with the world. And so I call it the power of manding. In past times that I have given presentations for that locally here in Ohio. So if you're just joining us, we're talking all about requesting. So we had talked about, as a review, we want to prompt mands at first so students know that communication is easy. So if you have a student who is working with a device, we want to make sure they know where that button is on the device. If we're working with a student who's using sign language to communicate, we want to make sure that, if they're communicating cookie, that we are maybe hand over hand prompting that so that they understand like, oh, this isn't so bad, I can do this. I sign cookie, I get a cookie, I sign outside, I can go outside. And then if we're working with a learner who is verbalizing, that we could give our learners verbal prompts and ways that we could say, we're going to help you, we're going to support you. We know communication has been difficult for you, but we are going to work on that together and we can do this. And then we also want to be cognizant that if we are prompting a student, that we are taking data and that we are analyzing that data so that we can make decisions about when to fade back on that level of prompting. So that was something we had talked about. We also talked about making sure that we're using specific mands. So if we have a student who is just learning how to communicate, we want to pick 3 to 5 things that we would like them to request. So that might be music, that might be bubbles, that might be walk, depending on the age level of your learner, right? Early learner doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's young, unfortunately. It could be somebody who's in middle school, high school, who hasn't developed a way to communicate with the world. So if you're just joining us, we're kind of recapping what we talked about with manding. We also want to make sure that we capture many opportunities across the student's day to work on requesting. So we want to make sure that it's embedded, this idea of embedded language instruction. We want to make sure that we as a speech language pathologist are working on requesting throughout the day, that we're training other staff on how to work on requesting throughout the day, and that it's embedded, that the speech language pathologist is not the only person working on this skill. So if you're just joining me, we're kind of recapping what we talked about for manding. As a disclaimer, if you need a speech language pathologist in your area, please visit ASHA, www.asha.org. And if you need behavioral assistance, please go to www.bacb.com and you can find a professional in your area. So make sure that language instruction is embedded. We can't be the only ones that are taking the student down to speech therapy room and making all the magic happen and then bringing the student back and they're communicating. It really is a team effort. So we have to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what requesting is and everybody knows how we should be prompting the child and what the response form is. Tonight, to wrap up this little discussion about manding that we've been talking about, I want to leave you with 2 big ideas. So one of the things we hadn't talked about is making sure to be a giver, not a taker. And so I heard this phrase, I feel like, from my BCBA supervisor down in Austin. And her supervisor was Dr. Carbone, who I may have talked about before, but he's a big guru in the ABA world. And so there is this idea of be a giver, not a taker. And when I heard this, I thought, oh my gosh, this like light bulb moment, aha moment. And the idea is that if you give a student something, let's say that a student wants a drink of juice. And so we're talking about be a giver, not a taker, if you are just tuning in. So like or comment if you're listening. So if we give a student some juice, we would maybe have a cup and we pour some juice in it, give it to the student. When the juice is all done, the idea is, oh, the student is motivated, right? We talked about MO. The student is motivated to ask for that juice again. So, oh, the juice is gone. Okay, I'm going to ask for juice again. Okay, I'll give you some more juice. You take some, you drink some, it goes away, and it's a natural motivation to ask for that juice again. So that's the idea. What we don't want to do is we don't want to take something away. And I've watched many sessions of speech therapists and my own sessions when I'm analyzing them afterwards, after maybe somebody's had a behavioral moment that turns into the rest of the session being that way. And I think like, oh, I was being a taker. So don't be a taker. So the idea is be a giver, not a taker. Somebody wants bubbles, maybe we blow some bubbles, and maybe we don't give the bubbles and then have to take them back. So it's that idea of when we're taking, and if I'm going to take something back from a student, I'm not saying don't ever take something back, but I was in a CPI training at work like maybe a year or two ago, and somebody had a great idea and just said, if you're going to take something from a student, let them know, right? I don't like it when people touch my things or get too close to my little personal bubble. So make sure that if you are going to take something from a student, that you'd say like, okay, we're going to take this now. And so that's the idea. I could talk about that for 30 minutes alone. So be a giver, not a taker. And so these Manding ideas are just brief strategies. If you're part of my email list, I did send out a PDF that had the different strategies listed that we've talked about in the past 3 weeks, so that if you are working in a room or you're working with paraprofessionals or you just want a reminder for staff, that you could print those out and have those up. So this is a big one. Be a giver, not a taker. If you want to hear more of me go more in depth about Manding, one of my favorite subjects, I do have a training on my TPT store, which is ABA speech, and I think it's like $3. It's a hot seller. It's my most popular one. So anyway, okay, so the idea is be a giver, not a taker. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is this idea of a rotating array of reinforcement. Now, I just kind of picked this up when I got all this information about these different strategies that I've discussed, and I've implemented them, my 14 years of practice and working with students. And so what I think really goes hand in hand, and what I've been training on a lot, is this idea of having a rotating array of reinforcement. So the idea is, and I brought some of my kids' stuff. So the idea is, if the student wants a book, okay, they either say book or they say read book, or it's Thomas. Okay, so they say Thomas. They say something specific, right? We're working on specific mans. The man stands alone. So they go, Thomas book. Oh, great. Okay, Thomas book. I have a Thomas book. You want the Thomas book? Okay, here you go. Maybe you give the book to the student. They flip on through the pages. They're looking at it. Me as a speech therapist, I'm thinking, okay, I want to get more trials in, right? I got my little data sheet. We're taking prompted, unprompted data. Now, I don't want to take that book away because that may upset the student. And it's fine that they're looking at the book. I'm glad they're excited about the book. What I may do is present another potential reinforcer. Okay, so this is the idea of rotating reinforcement. Well, then the student may see this and say, oh, I really love that thing. That's my favorite. I want that now. So they may say ambulance or press a button on their device to request it. Okay, ambulance here, great. So I give them the ambulance, and eventually what I could do is I could just kind of clear that book away, right? And I got it into my area now. So I have control of the books and maybe bubbles and whatever else I have over here. So the idea is I'm not going to take that away, because that would be being a taker. And that's a no-no. We want to be a giver. So we want to have this rotating array of reinforcement. Okay, so, oh, llama, llama. The student plays with this for a little while. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about how to have a rotating array of reinforcement when you're working on Manding. So I may present something else after the students engage with that ambulance for a little while, and then they may say, oh, llama, llama. Or maybe they are signing and they're just learning the sign for books. So I go right in with that prompt because, right, we want to give many opportunities and we want to prompt communication at first so students understand this is easy, I can do this. Because what happens a lot of times, and what happens with a lot of learners that I see in more specialized settings, is that they weren't able to develop a response form. Instead, they developed a behavioral repertoire that is getting their needs met throughout the day. And so, we as a team need to say, I don't want you to be able to communicate that way. I really want to help you replace that maladaptive behavior that's a barrier and work on Manding in this way. So I'm going to prompt you. I'm going to help. No big deal. So maybe we go in, they see the Llama Llama book, and then we help them sign book, right? And then they engage in that for a little while, and then you bring out maybe the iPad or like maybe something they really want for a snack. Okay, so that's the idea. Be a giver, not a taker. We don't want to take things away unless we have to. And if we have to take something away, we want to tell the student like, hey, okay, I'm going to take that now. Okay, because I don't like people touching my stuff. So we need to assume that we need to give the students, they have rights too. So we don't want to just grab their things away. And then the idea of having a rotating array of reinforcement. Okay, so, you have that ambulance, awesome, look what else I have. And then that way we're getting many different opportunities. That leads me to my other take-home point in all these little sessions we've talked about Manding, is that we want to make sure that we have language instruction embedded throughout their learner's day. So if you're already doing that, give me a little comment or a like and let me know. And so, as a speech-language pathologist is the way that I function primarily at work. I will start a session with Manding because we talked about like my Starbucks Dunkin' Donut analogy. Like today I had Starbucks, but I really wanted Dunkin' Donuts, but there's no drive-thru. But the idea is some days I want one thing, some days I want something else. So when you start your session, your work session, if you're a special educator or BCBA, you're asking the student, what are you into today? So you're really validating that MO, their motivation. We can't assume that they want the same thing every day. And we should always be kind of reinforcement sampling and seeing what other types of things the students may like. Like I just printed off a preference assessment, which I talked about a couple sessions ago. The same exact one, because it's my favorite, for a student because he's been kind of requesting the same types of things. And so I want him to feel like he has more things and he can access more things. So that is just kind of a little recap. So if we have a student who is nonverbal, limited verbally, trying to find their voice and communicate with the world, we absolutely want to start work on Manding. There are a lot of other things that we want to work on as well, but Manding is where we start because the student understands, I do something, I get something. I do something, I get something. And then what we often see is an increase in communication and a decrease in some of those behavioral barriers when we're working together as a team with our BCBA, if we have one, behavioral support, teacher, parent, student, all that good stuff. So that's the gold standard. So that's just a little recap. If you want to hear more on my TPT store, ABA Speech, I have a webinar that goes more into all those different things that I talked about tonight. I did want to let you know, this week was exciting. I started a blog. So at www.abaspeech.blogspot.com, and I will put all these things in the comments below. But I am going to blog once a week, like I've been popping on here for these ABA Speech live sessions. And we'll be talking about things that go on in my therapy room and hopefully giving great ideas and all those different things. So I wanted to share that. I also, for November, we're going to have a freebie. The freebie is if you were an email subscriber, which my email is www.abaspeech.org. If you sign up, and I revamped the website, so come on over if you haven't been in a while. I revamped the website, and in November, the freebie is going to either be a webinar or a adapted story about vocation and the speech-language pathologist. Okay, or not even speech-language pathologist, vocation and how can we tie communication into those different types of things. I think oftentimes I work middle school, high school level mostly. It's hard to find information about what are other people doing with communication for that age group. And it's so vital. It's so very important because we want our students to have leisure skills. We want our students to have competitive employment. And so that's going to be what the November freebie is. It will either be a webinar or it will be a product that will eventually go into my TPT store, but you as email subscribers will get it free and you will get it first. So I just wanted to let you know about that. If you haven't seen, I do have a Let's Talk About Halloween story. I actually don't typically print these out. I use these on my iPad or a smart board, but these are fill in the blanks. It's a story about Halloween, which is a fill in the blank is a verbal operant, right, is an interverbal. Okay, so it has a story, and then at the end of the story, there are some fill in the blanks. And then after the fill in the blanks, which I know you can't see them all, after the fill in the blanks are social questions. Do you like Halloween? What's your favorite candy? And so I like to use these with mixed groups of students so everybody has a way to participate. So that is just $2 in the store. And last but not least, if you haven't heard me talk about these, I created a project called the Action Builder Cards. I was sick and tired of seeing all the products out there that just had one example of an action because that's not tied to reality. So these cards have many different examples of functional actions that students may see, high resolution photos, and really awesome guiding text on the back. So if you're interested in those, I will put the link up for those too. I use mine every day, so if you work with me, you know I'm always carrying these babies around. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.